March Comes In Like a Lion was one of the most insightful animes I've ever experienced. It had so much to say about humanity and life, and it said it with so much heart and care. It had so much to say, in fact, that I've very much been stumbling with how I want to write this reflection. It covers so much that speaks so deeply to my soul that I wasn't sure which elements to focus on and how to tie them all together. The importance of bonds, overcoming depression and trauma, finding your purpose, obtaining the belief that you deserve to be happy, the power and beauty of empathy, the revelation that people of all kinds of different ages and backgrounds have a much richer story, inner layers, and fears and scars than you might expect. There's a lot to this story, and it said it all with such profound wisdom and warm, empathetic characters. This sure ended up being a very Lucas story. If I could be friends with any of the artists that I've come to love and admire so much, Chika Umino would be very, very high on my list. She wrote every character with so much depth and humanity, and she had so many themes beautifully intertwining and connecting throughout the story that comprehensively and profoundly talked about the most important parts of being alive. The art that one creates does not always reflect the artist behind it all. But with a story, characters, and themes like this, it's hard for me to imagine Chika being anything but the most caring, understanding, and empathetic person out there. As I was looking into what people thought of this story and what it meant to them, I found dwarves of people who were so touched and motivated to truly move forward and find happiness after experiencing March Comes In Like a Lion. I hope she knows how much light she's given to the world. If I were to write a fully comprehensive reflection about this story, we would be here for hours. It was very, very hard to focus on just the aspect that meant the most to me because no matter what, it will feel like I'm leaving out such rich, impactful messages, moments, and characterization. For most pieces of art, the part that I loved the most and the part that spoke to me the most would have been the same no matter the point in my life that I experienced that art. But I think if I were to have experienced this story at different stages of my life, the part that would have stood out to me the most would be quite different. But that goes to illustrate just how many areas this show touches on. Depression, fears, hardship, anxiety, self-doubt, and pain are tricky and multi-layered. The sources of one depression can be completely different from another depression. Some depressions have many sources. I've become a pretty bright and warm person, but inevitably I still sink back into a very dark place at least a couple times a year. And that's rarely because I relapse into my fears and hardships of old. The things that are weighing heavy on my heart now are very different from the things that were weighing heavy on my heart when I was a teenager. When I overcome a depressive episode, it will usually be for good. I think about things with such intensity and sincerity that when I find a way to overcome something, it'll persist for years to come. If I fall into another dark place, it is almost always because there is a new challenge that I am facing, or a new way of looking at something that darkens my soul that I have to wrestle with. March looks at hardship and depression from so many different angles that I truly think that this may be the best piece of art that handles such serious subject matter. March very much sees depression for the convoluted, messy web that it is. It highlights so many different ways in which a person can be pulled into the darkness, but also so many ways that people can be pulled back into the light. I think the part that I would have loved most about this show would have been the part that spoke most to the kind of suffering that I was going through at the time, and I don't think that would have made for a lesser reflection. I absolutely treasured and profusely cried at all the ways this anime showcased overcoming different types of darknesses, because at some point I have been there, and there are still remnants of those scars within me. There's so much here to appreciate and expand upon, and it was important to me that I mention all the ways that makes this story so soulful. But for the rest of this reflection, let's just dive into the part that meant the most to me at this point in my life. To get to the point where the story touched my soul the most, we must first closely examine the main character, Rei Kiriyama. This show had many wonderful characters and moments, but Rei very much is the heart of the show, and his characterization and growth led to my biggest takeaway by far. Rei starts the show in a very, very dark place. At a very young age, he lost his family in an accident. He had a foster family for most of his youth, but his dynamic with his foster family was full of complications and tribulations. His foster father favored him over his biological children, but that favor was very much tied to his ability to perform in shogi. It was far from an ideal father and son loving relationship. And yet, the favor the father had for him, even if it was mostly superficial, was enough to cause exceptional resentment and turmoil within the family. The other kids felt completely neglected and unwanted. And Rei's foster sister borderline tortured Rei for most of his youth for this, playing tricks on his mind and crushing his self-worth. His family slowly became more and more broken, and he full-heartedly blamed himself for it. His school life wasn't much better. Not only was he unable to make even a single friend for most of his youth, but the kids would push in his face how much they couldn't stand being around him. He was known as the loner kid, the odd kid, the kid no one talks to. And so, kids would try their best to never interact with him because they did not want to be considered odd themselves. And so, for years and years, Rei did his best to keep to himself, believing that the only good he could bring to the world was keeping to himself and not being a burden. He invested almost all of his time and energy into shogi, not out of love for the game, but because it was the only way people would ever engage with him. The show begins with Rei just having moved out of his foster family's house, and he's living on his own even though he's still in high school. He knew that if he were to stay any longer, it would just cause more turmoil and conflict with his family. And so he is faced with complete isolation, the stress of having to be self-sufficient, the guilt of ruining a family, the belief that he has no worth and nothing to offer others, and no hope or knowledge of how to change his bad situation and state of mind. His depression is indeed multi-layered and tricky. And on top of his situation, Rei is an intensely sensitive soul. He very deeply feels the pain and suffering of others. He also isn't the kind of person to ignore his issues. He faces his problems head-on with such profound sincerity. He is constantly thinking about his issues, the pain of others, and life in general. I was enamored by how sensitive, reflective, empathetic, and introspective Rei was during the early parts of this show. I value and relate to those traits so much, and I've rarely seen them highlighted to this degree. But a complex depression mixed with a sensitive soul can be a brutal combination. Even when he would make strides in one area that was bringing him down, another area would keep him doubtful and in the darkness. But slowly throughout the show, one by one, a beautiful soul helps to bring Rei into the light. He has a teacher that very much looks after him, keeps him company during lunch when he has no friends, and strategically and compassionately does what he can to steer Rei on a better path. He has older, more experienced people in his shogi tournaments that look after Rei, make him laugh, and try to teach him how to navigate the difficulties of being a professional shogi player. He has a rival friend that's his age who passionately and stubbornly reinforces the idea that he and Rei are best friends and constantly tries to show Rei that he sees him in such a high light and just wants him to take better care of himself. And most notably, there is the Kawamoto family. The Kawamotos are a family of 3 young sisters, a preschooler, a middle schooler, and the oldest sister is in her young 20s, just out of high school. These sisters lost their parents in an accident a few years before our story begins, and they are doing everything they can to move past that heartache and be there for each other. A tall order for such young kids. And yet, despite their struggles, they bring Rei in. They don't just treat Rei like a friend. They aren't just there for him out of charity. No, they treat Rei like family. They cook him warm meals. They nurse him to health when he's sick. They take interest in his shogi tournaments and his general well-being. And they push him to come over when they haven't seen him for a while and they know he might be going too deep into his dark ways of thinking. They are some of the most warm, caring souls I have ever seen. At first, these bright, beautiful souls just make everything harder and more confusing for Rei. He still fundamentally believes that he has nothing of value to offer anyone. So all this kindness just makes him feel like a burden because he cannot offer anything in return. And the warmth they provide just makes the isolation colder when he has to leave. Depression can be hard to overcome even if you have good people in your life. But what really sparked the change in Rei was getting closer to Hina, the middle sister in the Kawamoto family. Even though Hina is still very young, she shines as one of the brightest characters I've ever seen, and certainly the brightest soul Rei has ever seen. She profusely cries from how hard it is to have lost her parents. She gets extraordinarily excited and giddy from even little things like eating or making sweets or Rei coming to visit. And she gets fiercely passionate and determined when she has a goal or when someone is hurting or being mistreated. In the words of Rei, usually she would become spirited with a clap, depressed with a sigh, or outraged with a snap. However you look at it, she's very lively. I think that's her unique personality trait. There was a part in the story where Hina suffers through some intense, horrendous bullying. There was a girl in her class who was bullied, mistreated, and targeted in the worst way imaginable. Hina was the only person brave enough and compassionate enough to be there for the girl who was being bullied. She defended her and did everything she could to lift her spirits. But doing so made Hina become the next target. She suffered greatly, had the whole class turned against her, was constantly humiliated, and experienced the nastiest pranks. It was some of the hardest storytelling I've ever had to experience. And I cried hard episode after episode as I watched one of the brightest souls get tortured day in and day out. It was heart-wrenching to see Hina go through this. These were some of the hardest episodes I've ever had to stomach in any series ever. But her unwavering resolve led to one of the most important moments in Rei's life.
I don't regret anything. I just can't. After all, I know that I didn't do anything wrong. I won't let them bring me down, ever!
At that moment, as I listened to her pouring her heart out, telling me everything she'd been through, it was like I'd suddenly been struck by lightning.
And I think this was the moment that changed everything for Rei. The true spark. Up to this point, Rei's intelligence and sensitivity were mostly just continuously spiraling him into depression and darkness. But through his intelligence and sensitivity, more than anyone, he understood how much strength, compassion, and light this girl possessed, and wanted to do everything he could to brighten her life. Rei's transformation didn't happen overnight. He still had a lot of work to do. But more and more, he was able to see the beauty and light in people. He was able to see the beauty and light in the world. And through his fierce, unwavering determination to brighten Hina's life, he was finally able to see that he had something of value to give to people. Rei may not be as lively as Hina, but he too is one of the most caring, empathetic, and understanding souls I have ever seen. The kind of soul that everyone would be beyond blessed to have in their life. It just took the right people and circumstances for him to be able to see it, and for him to bring that light into the world. I hear a lot of people endlessly talk about how much they hate humanity, how stupid, pathetic, or evil humanity is, and I hate that kind of talk, because there are beautiful, bright souls everywhere, across different ages, hobby groups, career fields, cultures, continents, you name it. They are all over, and their light shines so bright. And I think as long as you go out into the world and don't shut yourself off, you'll find them. Or even better, they'll usually find you. The majority of people may not be these beautiful, bright souls, but I think so many people aren't bright souls because they're bad or pathetic, but because they haven't had a Hina in their life to give them the spark that they need. And I want to do all I can to be that kind of spark for as many people as possible. And I think Rei ended up thinking the same, which eventually led to his best self, a bright, healed version of himself. There are many points in my life where I think this would have been my greatest takeaway, the part of the show that impacted me the most. And while it still did have a tremendous impact on me, there's something bigger that impacted me as I was watching this story unfold. I have been obsessed with heroes for a long time, inspired by their ambition and altruism and aiming to live up to their standards and ability to help so many people. I wouldn't say Rei is one of the greatest heroes I've seen. He doesn't quite fit that role. He isn't trying to save the world. He isn't trying to completely solve everyone's depression and sorrow. He doesn't spout speeches about altruism, hope, and humanity, and he doesn't have some grand dream to make his mark on the world. It isn't that he doesn't deserve to be called a hero. I just think there's a better title for him. I think Rei is much more like a guardian angel than a hero. He may not have the grandest, most ambitious dream. He may not be trying to reach the hearts of hundreds of people, but he's more there for the people that are in his life than almost anyone I've seen, even my favorite heroes. He listens to people with the highest amount of attention and care, and he is constantly thinking of ways to help the ones that he loves and show that he cares and that he's there for them. He's the shining example of what it means to be reliable and dependable. You can always depend on Rei to be there for you, physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever you need. He has deep layers of empathy, but it isn't coming from a place of pain. He has learned to truly take care of himself, to see the light and beauty in the world, and how to nurture his soul. His empathy, wisdom, and sensitivity, combined with a healed, rich soul, make for such a special presence, such a special friend. Rei may not be the brightest light I've seen in a character, but I think he just might be the warmest light. I have been obsessed with dreams and ambition for a long time now. I think dreams are a beautiful thing. To aspire and fight for something profound, a better you, a better world, I think it takes a lot of courage, heart, idealism, determination, and hope. I'm enamored with big dreamers, and I will always be a big dreamer. But I think my obsession with dreams has gone a bit too far. Because while dreams are beautiful and can lead us to our best lives and best selves, they also fundamentally are focusing on what you or the world lacks. I think a younger me would have tried to defend dreams by saying something like, they don't have to highlight what you lack, and they can just be used to highlight wonderful possibilities. But after having unfulfilled dreams and ambitions for so long, I do think to some extent they fill me with the feeling and belief that I am lacking. To achieve your dreams, you need to take action and continuously do so much planning and reflection. It can be exhausting and disheartening, and everything that you do that does not lead to your dream will lead you to believe that you need to do more to achieve your dream, that you weren't enough, and you need to do something more to be enough. I don't think my dream of finding soulmate love is misplaced. I have the heart for it, and my best self and my best life is absolutely achieved through that love. And I will never stop believing that there's anything more beautiful or profound than that kind of love. But I think the extent to which I've become obsessed with this dream is misplaced. The more I fight for this dream and fall short and become more and more disheartened, the more I have to build up this dream in my head as something essential, as something more important than anything else. And I have to build it up in that way so that I will still have what it takes to keep fighting for it when I keep getting disheartened. And the more essential it becomes in my head, the more and more it feels like I am lacking and there's something lacking from my life. My dream of bringing light to as many people as I can is also not misplaced. There are so many people out there who could do so much if they just had the right kind of friend in their life. Their own Hina. I can't be that kind of person for everyone, but I've seen the light I can bring when I truly apply myself and prioritize bonds and my love for people above all else. And I think the best kinds of heroes are the ones that push themselves to reach out far beyond their inner circle. Because even if it's overwhelming and exhausting, there are so many people out there that aren't getting the love, care, connection, and warmth that they deserve. And yet, I think the extent that I've come obsessed with this dream too is also misplaced. There will always be people who are suffering and lacking the friendship that they need and deserve. It is something to acknowledge and fight against, but it very much is another dream that highlights what the world is lacking. The more I reach out beyond my inner circle, the more people that I will find in a dark place, and the more apparent and frustrating my limits will become when I can only be a part of so many lives. I think so much of the reason that I see Rei as the warmest light is because, unlike myself and my favorite heroes, he is not weighed down by what he or the world is lacking. He is very much focused on what he has. Although his bonds are few, every single one means the absolute world to him, and brings so much light to his life and his heart. And with how caring and considerate he is, helping these people out to the extent that he does is more than enough to fill up his time. He may not have a lot of hobbies, passions, or goals, but what he does have is more than enough to keep him excited, focused, and interested about life. Being able to see and appreciate the beauty in people and the world is an art, and Rei has mastered this art. I think a younger me may have thought that Rei was limiting his potential by not having a grand dream and not reaching out to more people. And to some extent, maybe that's true. But in place of that is a man who has learned how to heal and nurture his soul. A man who can see just how much there already is to everything in his life. A man who can make a feast out of what are just crumbs to most people. A man who has found what fulfills him. And while he may end up sharing that warm light with just a few people, that light may be more contagious and soothing than the bright light of my other heroes. And without some grand dream, he will actually have the time and energy to give those people his whole world. I used to spend a lot of time thinking about happiness when I was younger, and I eventually came to the conclusion that happiness is about seeing, not achieving. Happiness is so much more about being able to see and appreciate the world and all the good in your life than it is about achieving a better you or any kind of success. That's not to say it's an easy thing to do. I think it takes practice and time to master, just like any other art. And sometimes you can really, truly be in a dark, rough spot where happiness is no longer about seeing, but about getting yourself to a better place. But I do very much believe that this is generally the key to happiness, and so much of the message March Comes In Like a Lion had to share. I came up with this philosophy of happiness when I was around 14 years old. And at the time, I thought it was one of the most brilliant philosophies that I've come up with. But over time, more and more, I lost sight of this way of thinking. And ironically, I think that's mostly due to my hyper-focus on my unfulfilled dreams. I tell myself over and over again, I should keep fighting for love, no matter how much it brings me down, because I value love so much more than happiness. I tell myself all the time, I need to keep pushing myself to bring more light to others, no matter how overwhelmed I am, because so many have it much worse than me. The only time I really allow myself to focus on my own happiness over my goals is when I'm in a very dark place and approaching depression. I don't think I've been deeply and persistently depressed since I was a teenager. I think overcoming my dark, suicidal teenage depression was so difficult and took so much that it set me up to overcome most depressive episodes that have come after. I'm a very sensitive person, and life can be really hard. I will inevitably face dark patches here and there. But through remembering how I overcame my teenage depression, and allowing myself to focus on my own well-being when I'm in a dark patch will usually do the trick. I've gotten very good at overcoming and fighting off depression. I used to take so much pride in my ability to fight off depression, and thought it put me in the unique position to bring light to others who are in a dark place. But I see more than ever that overcoming depression is only half of the picture. The other half is nurturing your soul, finding the things and the people that speak the most to your soul, putting the time and effort to appreciate and see the beauty of what you already have in your life until it becomes second nature. Reminding yourself that it's okay to nurture your soul, even if there's so much you need to do to achieve your dreams. Reminding yourself that it's okay to nurture your soul, even if there are those out there that are suffering. Only allowing myself to focus on my happiness and nurture my soul in order to fight off depression has left my soul in a very fragmented state. It's like a relationship where love and care is only shown when things are going really bad. It may solve temporary problems, but eventually it'll become clear just how broken that relationship is. I will always fight for my dreams, but I want to fight for them with a soul that is healed, rich, whole, and cared for. A soul like Rei's. And I can't express enough how much March Comes In Like a Lion means to me for for teaching me that.